Story 1. My dad once told me that the reason his relationships with his ex-wife, my mom, and his new girlfriend fell apart was because they were both the same zodiac sign. No, Dad, I think it's because you cheated on them. Story 2. I've posted this before, but my aunt said Dutch people are from Denmark. I told her people from Denmark are Danish. The Dutch are from the Netherlands. She insisted that, no, sweetie, those are Neanderthals. Story 3. I was in the back seat at night and noticed she was driving with the high beams on. When I warned her, she said, the high beams are for the highway. Story 4. I was talking to a woman at a friend's barbecue who believed Albert Einstein invented gravity. She thought that by physically writing his equations backward, we could unlock the secrets to levitation. Story 5. A girl I used to work with was upset that her boyfriend only bought her 12 roses. She felt he should have done more. Story 6. My step-grandfather's son-in-law went by slick. His feats of foolishness were too numerous to fully detail, but some highlights include his belief that cough drops only work indoors because the medicine they contain is neutralized by outdoor air, his attempt to house and leash train an armadillo to impress his fancy cousins, his remark that the town wasted money replacing an obviously dilapidated bridge because it's been there for years. If it was going to collapse, it would have happened by now. Story 7. I attended college in Los Angeles, and on certain days, you can see Catalina Island from the beach. A girl I knew thought it was Japan. Story 8. Heard a woman talking about her recent trip to Morocco and how amazing it was. She then mentioned that she had never been to Africa but would love to visit. It seems strange that someone would book a holiday without checking where in the world they are going. Story 9. I worked in a coffee shop, and someone asked me for a double espresso without water. I made him a double and served it to him. He asked, "Does that have water in it?" I was so confused that I just put coffee grounds in the cup. I received a disciplinary action for that. Story 10. I think I want to do a cross-country road trip to Africa someday. No one ever does it, and I want to be one of the few. Spoken by a high school student with limited education. Texas. Turn off the lights. They are using up all the warm air. The girl genuinely believed that electronics and fire absorbed heat, which made them hot to the touch and subsequently lowered the temperature around them. Story 11. I used to work in a grocery store, and this elderly woman said, 25 cents a pound? I can get 4 pounds for $1 at Safeway. Story 12. Dinosaurs are not just made-up fairy tales. It wouldn't be so bad, but we live in London, where the Natural History Museum features full-scale dinosaurs for people to see. Story 13. One of my coworkers believes in flat Earth theory. The issue is that we are surveyors. Our job involves adapting data from a planar view, such as flat paper maps, to an ellipsoidal geoid model used in global positioning system technology. The concept of satellites falling toward Earth while orbiting it based on this mathematical model only holds true if the Earth is round. My colleague works with GPS technology and still believes the Earth is flat. He is either misinformed, or I would lose my house if we had to play poker. Story 14. I had a friend in high school whose name started with an E. She wore a necklace with just the letter E on it. A mean girl in that class looked at her necklace and said, "Haha, E for idiot." Story 15. That adult woman who talked about the sun shutting off at night was the safety representative at our company. Story 16. For a long time, my roommate thought Africa was a single country. He also believed that Sudan was located in Asia. Story 17. This was over 10 years ago and it still takes the cake. I refuse to be an organ donor because I'm going to need those. To which I replied, "You know you'd be dead, right?" She doubled down. "I don't care. I'd still need them." Story 18. I used to work with a husband and wife and it was an absolute nightmare. I would never recommend allowing a married couple to work together as they lacked common sense. One of their elderly relatives struggled with everyday tasks, and their solution was to claim they needed power of eternity. This wouldn't have been so foolish if they had only said it once, but it was repeated daily for months. No one corrected them because they were incredibly aggressive and toxic. I often wonder what they thought power of eternity actually was and what they would have done once they wielded such power. Story 19. I knew a man who had a strong dislike for cucumbers. He had an intense moral aversion to them. However, he loved pickles. It was not until he reached adulthood that he discovered pickles were made from cucumbers, which led him to experience a crisis of faith. To elaborate on his reaction, it took him weeks to come to terms with this revelation. He genuinely questioned whether he could ever eat pickles again, now that he knew they were made from cucumbers. Story 20. I sold a lawnmower for my tech-savvy dad. He dropped it off on Saturday. I listed it on Sunday and sold it on Monday. He came back the next weekend, and the lawnmower was gone. I told him I put it on Facebook Marketplace on Sunday, and it was gone on Monday. His reply was, "Facebook is open on Sundays?" Story 21. Here is a good one. I used to work in a machine shop with lathes and mills. We were always told never to try to remove the shavings or burrs with the machine running, whether the part or tool was spinning. I now do carpentry. However, yesterday I was working with my coworker using a big DeWalt magnetic drill to create some 2-inch holes in 1/2-inch steel. As the bit was spinning and cutting through the material, he reached over and tried to pull the burrs and shavings off the bit. I immediately stopped the machine and explained that if the bit grabs his glove, he is in for a rough time. He told me, "It's fine. I've done this plenty of times." Not 5 minutes went by before he repeated this, and his glove was ripped off while his hand was shredded by metal burrs and shavings. The moral of the story is that even if you have done something thousands of times, it only takes that one instance to cause a serious problem. Story 22. My friend and their ex were arguing about the song Santa Claus is Coming to Town. My friend told their 3 to 4-year-old that Santa couldn't really see them when they are sleeping or know when they are awake. Their co-parent reacted strongly and sent them an email expressing their frustration, saying, "Then how does he know who's naughty or nice? We still laugh about it every holiday season." Story 23. I once encountered someone who insisted that Britney Spears invented electronic dance music. Not popularized. Not revolutionized. Invented. Story 24. Performing oral sex on a woman as a man is considered submissive. The person who told me this was a self-proclaimed alpha male, single for several years, and had not had any women in his shared apartment for at least 2 years. This was confirmed by the 2 roommates, who are my childhood friends. Story 25. Before the eclipse, one of my coworkers asked me to explain the difference between the bright yellow object and the bright white object in the sky. I was momentarily speechless, then replied, "The bright yellow one emitting light is the sun, and the bright white one is the moon." She then asked, "How are they going to pass each other if one is to the right and one is to the left?" I can only hope she was asking for attention. No one can be that unaware. Story 26. I just returned from a trip to Cuba, and 2 things come to mind. First, the people trying to watch the eclipse when it wasn't even slightly visible from our location were just staring at the sun. Second, one day while we were on the beach, a large seabird flew over the ocean. I said to an older woman we had met, "I wonder what kind of bird that is." She insisted it was a dodo bird and would not believe that the dodo is extinct. I gave up arguing. Story 27. I was with my ex-wife at the time, and we were watching the Neil deGrasse Tyson version of Cosmos, where he discussed evolution. He used the example of selective breeding with wolves that eventually led to the domesticated dogs we see today. My ex-wife said, "You're telling me 2 wolves mated and the female gave birth to a chihuahua?" I was amazed by her response. Story 28. Okay, I know Harrisburg is the capital of Pennsylvania, but what's the capital of Philadelphia? Story 29. A girl I worked with who was around 18 at the time genuinely believed that in the past everything was black and white because that is how it appears in old films. I thought it was a joke at first, but she was completely serious. Story 30. I dated a girl who believed that penguins weren't real, but that the World Wrestling Entertainment was. She is a PhD scientist, the definition of book smart. Story 31. We were talking about having children at a family party. My cousin's 17-year-old daughter made a comment about how she never wants to have children. so she doesn't engage in self-stimulation during her period. As a 50-year-old man, I shouldn't be engaging in such discussions with a 17-year-old, but I couldn't understand this perspective, so I asked what she meant and how that keeps you from getting pregnant. Her response was, "Well, uncle, I'm surprised you don't know this, but it's the only time your hormones can trick your body into thinking it had real sex, and you can get pregnant without a man." Before you mention the uncle-cousin discrepancy, this girl also believes that anyone within 10 years of her age is a cousin, anyone more than 10 years older is an aunt or uncle, and anyone more than 10 years younger is a niece or nephew. Ask her about that and she'll say, "That's how generations work." There are many insights from her. If I remember more, I'll come back and update. Oh, and her parents don't correct her because it's useless. Once she gets an idea in her head, it leads to an argument, even if you can prove it. So we only challenge the ideas that can hurt her. What a way to raise a child. Story 32. Years ago at school, some girls were discussing how eating chocolate during pregnancy would affect the skin color of their babies. They were dead serious. I thought it would be funny to add to the conversation, so I said with a straight face and full of confidence, "That's actually kind of true. If you eat a lot of carrots during pregnancy, the chances that your baby will have ginger hair are much higher." I was joking. I added that this was due to the orange pigments in the carrots. They believed me, which made it hard to keep a straight face. Story 33. Back in 1999, I was standing next to Stonehenge when a Canadian backpacker wondered aloud, "How did those big stones fall on top of each other?" Story 34. The Earth is flat, with a dome separating us from the firmament. Additionally, the Devil's Tower is a tree stump. Story 35. A good friend of mine came up with both of these. "Did you know you can get breast cancer in your leg?" In a shocked voice, while looking at the nutrition label. Wow, this bottle of olive oil is 100% fat. The best part is that we were studying biology at university at the time. Story 36. A girl I worked with wanted to live in California or New Zealand. She didn't mind which, as they are both appealing options. She was also the same girl who wanted a Twilight tattoo at 30 and a pet monkey. During a conversation about Justin Bieber, I mentioned that he had a Batman logo on his car, and she screamed at me, "That is his job. You're only jealous." She was convinced that the film Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, was based on real events. I don't know where Kelly is now, as I haven't worked with her in 10 years, but I'm sure she's out there, making everyone around her less intelligent. Story 37. The only reason COVID affected the United States as severely as it did is that it is the most densely populated country in the world. It did not impact Europe or China as significantly because they are not as densely populated. Story 38. Reading books is for individuals who are afraid to learn from life, so they try to learn from the lives others have lived. But you never truly learn unless you experience it. Story 39. A girl in Spanish class wanted to know why he was called Don Quixote. In the 5th year of Spanish, she spoke the language better than she read it, and I'm not sure if she was cheating with the audiobook. I still don't understand how she thought donkey was Spanish. Story 40. At my old workplace, they have a non-disclosure agreement that means we cannot discuss internal matters with outsiders. However, according to one of my colleagues, this means that the person below us needs to own up to their mistakes. I was so dumbfounded when she told me that. It was really hard not to laugh in her face. Story 41. I'm not a racist, but I just don't think the presidency is a place for a woman. This was said by a coworker named Margaret in 2008. Story 42. I was asked by a professional how to round up to the next digit. The amount was $176.677. I told him it should be rounded to $176.68. I explained the rule that if the digit is 5 or higher, you round up. He didn't believe me. Story 43. My daughter had twins about 3 months ago. I've had more conversations than I can count, and they often go like this. Are they twins? Me, yes. Boys? Girls, or one of each? Me, one of each, a boy and a girl. Are they identical? Me. My new response is, yes. Well, everything but the penis. Story 44. Someone told me that everyone in the United States should speak English. They said this while sitting at dinner in Italy, and they didn't speak Italian. I mentioned this, and they had no response. Story 45. I was drinking water while standing, and someone told me that drinking water while standing is like the urine of a donkey and that it is sinful. What? Story 46. I had a college roommate who insisted that water boiled faster in front of an open window. It was -40 degrees outside, yet he was adamant that he was correct because the cold air from outside around the pot would make it boil faster. He believed that water boiled when it reached a certain temperature above the surrounding air. He also cranked the thermostat to the maximum and then complained about how hot it became, stating he had to keep his windows open to balance it out. Story 47. Working in healthcare, I have discovered that many individuals, 1. are unaware of the conditions for which they have been diagnosed, do not know if they have undergone surgery. If they have had surgery, they are unsure of the type or details of the procedures performed. It is concerning that these individuals lack knowledge about what has happened to their bodies. Story 48. A college student asked me why women shave their legs if they are always hairless. I asked him where he got that idea, and he said it was because women's legs are always smooth on television and in real life. I had to explain how shaving works. Story 49. My old roommate truly believed that Highland cows had shorter legs on one side. No one could say anything until his father chimed in with, "How do they turn around, Jared?" Story 50. Her name was Nadine, and she was a bartender at one of our hangout places. One day we were talking about World War II, and someone mentioned Dr. Joseph Mengele and the horrific medical experiments he conducted on Auschwitz prisoners. Nadine listened for a while before asking, "Why would anyone go to him?" Story 51. In junior year of high school, a girl randomly asked our English teacher in the middle of class, "If you're pregnant and you get a tattoo, does the tattoo transfer to the baby?" At least she was wise enough to figure out the answer after everyone started laughing. Story 52. A friend of mine saw a video of parasites coming out of raw pork when Coca-Cola was poured on it. He said he doesn't eat pork because pigs are filthy animals. I replied, "You're eating a ham and salad sandwich from 7-Eleven?" He said, "Nah, that's different." Story 53. My coworker refuses to use hand sanitizer, claiming it pollutes the lakes and harms the fish. She has many family members who are fishermen, so this issue affects them. Story 54. I was talking to an American while visiting my grandmother in the United States. They noticed that I had a Scottish accent and turned around to ask, "Oh, you're from Scotland? How long was the drive?" "Must have been a few days." I had to explain to this man that it's not possible to drive over the Atlantic Ocean. Story 55. My partner and I are from Scotland. My partner got off the train at Edinburgh Waverley Station and overheard an American ask, "Why did they build the castle so far away from the train station?" Story 56. The Louvre is depriving people of a genuine art experience because it does not allow them to physically touch paintings like the Mona Lisa. Story 57. There was one time our flight got canceled because of a snowstorm. The man sitting behind me said, "God damn it, this happens every year. Why don't they put a roof over the runway or something? Dumbass." Story 58. Anytime people talk about politicians with blind faith, it seems they believe these individuals actually control the world and want what is best for the citizens of their country. I have a master's degree in political science and have lost all faith in government, regardless of political affiliation. Story 59. I worked as an ocean rescuer. I went out for a rescue, and while I was bringing the person I initially went to get in, someone else was being pulled out to sea in the same rip current. I swam over to the individual, a woman in her early 20s, and asked, "Are you okay?" She replied, "No, I can't swim." I thought to myself, "You're in the Atlantic Ocean, a large body of water, and you can't swim." I told her to grab on, and I brought both of them back to shore. Story 60. I had a girl in my freshman year argue passionately with me that Haiti was in Europe because they speak French. Story 61. The woman said the man she is dating plans to leave his wife for her. Any woman who says this is completely delusional. Story 62. A few years ago, during a military exercise in my city, I spoke with an American who commented on the lack of black people in Norway. I thought it was just a slip of the tongue, but he genuinely believed that all black people outside of Africa were African American. Story 63. When people say something is made of chemicals to deter you from using it, I want to remind you that I am also made of chemicals. Story 64. My mother-in-law bought a specialized water bottle that supposedly adds hydrogen to your water because, and this is a direct quote, hydrogen is good for you and there's no hydrogen in water. Story 65. I just need a break from work. This statement comes from a man who took an additional 9 months off from work, had worked a total of 100 hours in 2.5 years, had no car, no job at the time of his statement, and was couch surfing with a baby on the way. Story 66. A 42-year-old married woman with 2 children was caught having a long-term sexual relationship with the 19-year-old son of her best friend of 17 years. She also changed his diapers, babysat him numerous times, and attended graduations. Story 67. I have a note from my doctor stating that I do not have to pick up my dog's waste. Story 68. A national minister in India stated, "Don't go by the mathematics. Mathematics never helped Einstein discover gravity," when questioned about the statistics behind his election promises. Story 69. Years ago, I was a cashier at a grocery store. Like most grocery stores, they played music in the store. A Beatles song came on. To make casual conversation, I said to a customer, "Oh, nice, the Beatles." The customer, in a completely earnest tone, said, "I don't listen to much American music." Now, if we want to make excuses, she was young. However, I was probably the same age or younger than her at the time, about 19, and she was very clearly American by her accent and fashion sense. Maybe not unintelligent per se, but wildly culturally unaware. Story 70. We had to cut a lot of lemons before each shift for water and iced tea. A server at my restaurant asked, "What do you do when all the lemons are green?" I replied, "You call them limes and put them back in the fridge." Story 71. You have to move to the mountains and hide yourself away because the poles are going to switch. People are going to get upset, and everything is controlled by artificial intelligence. We are all alien hybrids who have already died and been backed up, now watching life on a cinema screen. Story 72. A relative of mine said that she doesn't have any plants in her house because they consume all the oxygen. Story 73. I worked at an oil company in the information technology department. One of my colleagues there believed that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Story 74. When I was a 9th grade biology teacher in the state of Georgia and taught evolution, I always started my classes by asking my students what they thought of when they heard the term evolution. It was a great exercise to see what misconceptions they had. I received many amazing responses. Some classics include the student who confidently stated, "We didn't come from monkeys," and I told her she was right, but we would explain it more eloquently. The student who asked if I was legally allowed to teach them about it, and I responded, "I am legally required to teach you about it because it's science and it's true." I haven't been a teacher for 14 years, but will never forget those students. Story 75. I was on a floating dock in downtown Juneau, Alaska. Cruise ships anchor in the deep channel, and passengers are ferried to shore in small motorboats. A woman was stepping off the motorboat onto the floating dock. In a loud voice, she asked, "How high above sea level are we here?" Story 76. How come Iceland didn't melt when that volcano erupted? How come when I get into the shower, I don't break like a television would? She thought the sun and the moon were the same thing, but at different times of the 24-hour clock. Story 77. I was working just north of the border in Canada, and during a long weekend, a visitor from the United States came into our store. "Excuse me, your machine is broken. I just put my card into the ATM out front and it gave me Canadian money." "Yes, you're in Canada. We have our own currency here, which can be exchanged for goods and services." I tried not to laugh while saying that. I failed. Story 78. The coffee in the break room is too strong. Just add water to your cup, but don't mess with the coffee. Story 79. A man tried to explain menstruation to me. He said that virgins can't have periods. His reasoning was that a person bleeds from their first intercourse and then continues to bleed. According to him, all the virgins who have periods are just lying. Story 80. After a long cabin crew duty, I was picked up at 3 a.m. by a taxi driver from the airport. I asked, "If the airport is busy, do you just stay there and hover until there's space?" The driver insisted we just stop and float while waiting for a landing slot. Even when I explained how planes fly, he refused to believe me. Story 81. About 25 years ago, a woman I worked with in a factory said, "They just want to clone Christopher Reeve so they can kill it and take its spine." Story 82. Neanderthals can be frozen and then thawed and be perfectly fine walking and talking. Story 83. My mom refuses to wear a seatbelt because she believes that if she gets into an accident severe enough to require a seatbelt to save her life, she would rather die. I have spent no time trying to change her mind. Story 84. I genuinely feel that every day brings a new level of ignorance, as people on the internet seem to be trying to outdo each other in a competition to see who can regress the fastest. My top contenders for this title are currently the chemtrail believers. Story 85. Do we remember the conspiracy about COVID and 5G trackers? Someone from work was convinced and began telling everyone that the vaccine tracks your data from inside your body to your Facebook account. I had never rolled my eyes so hard. Story 86. I stopped at a roadside cafe in Kansas at about 3 a.m. and walked in on one waitress chatting with another, who looked very bored. She said, "Now, he said he was asleep downstairs on the couch when the fire broke out, but I think it's weird that only my stuff burned up." She saw me and there was an awkward pause. "Hi, what can I get you?" Story 87. In 2015, a town in my home state voted down a proposal for a new solar farm primarily because residents thought the solar panels would drain all of the energy from the sun. I have never been so embarrassed by my state's educational system in my life. Story 88. It was the deep state. The term deep state is often used to describe normal individuals performing their duties, especially when it poses challenges or embarrassment for a politician I support. Story 89. I went on a tour of the Normandy beaches, and another tourist asked the guide why it was called the Second World War. It seems rather odd to name something the second without a first. This person also frequently mentioned that they were a teacher in the United States for 20 years, so they believed they knew everything and were very smart. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.